Hello, welcome to The Wandering Drew. I am Drew. On this week's episode, I'd like to continue my discussion on hydration and discuss some heat-related illnesses that go hand in hand with keeping hydrated on the trail. I hope you'll join me. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. Last week I covered hydration and dehydration. I discussed why water is important to us, how to gauge your hydration levels while you're out on the trail, what are some of the common symptoms you can expect to see in yourself or another hiker while you're out there, as well as some of the ways that you can offset or mitigate dehydration and bring yourself back toward being hydrated. So this week, I'd like to add a few things to that conversation from last week and then move into new territory. And in last week's episode, I mentioned that drinking water is the best thing you can do for yourself. In addition, you may want to consider adding some things to that water to make it more effective. And those substances that I mentioned were electrolytes. And in this context, an electrolyte is any substance which aids the body in conducting electricity. And these substances, the electrolytes, are important to us because they aid our body in communication and carrying out bodily functions. In fact, they help us actually move on the trail. Our muscles need to maintain a certain level of both water and electrolytes inside them. Without these, the symptoms that we mentioned last week, as well as some I'm going to discuss now, will become apparent. And some of the most common and easily replaceable electrolytes are sodium and chloride. And this is one of the reasons that I mentioned that even if you don't have electrolyte replacements, just having a salty snack will usually aid you both in feeling better and fighting dehydration. And we all realize on a very hot and humid day that we sweat a lot and that we're using salt, as salt is found in our sweat. Additionally, we might be going to the bathroom more often, and as we go to the bathroom, we're also losing not only fluids, but also our electrolytes, or salt, as well. So one of the reasons why you might wish to add some electrolyte replacement into your hydration is because on days like this, we're losing more than we normally would due to the environment and our exertion. And let's look at it this way. Most normally in our outside life, we intake enough electrolytes to hydrate us, along with the fluids, and allow our bodies to conduct whatever processes it needs throughout the day. However, when we're exercising heavily, or hiking or backpacking, we're using up these electrolytes more than usual. Our diet may not be enough to sustain us with enough of these substances to offset any symptoms or lower levels that we may encounter while we're out hiking. Additionally, even if you are ingesting enough of them, most likely the majority of those electrolytes are being absorbed at the end of the day when you have your dinner. Most hikers wake up early in the morning and start hitting the trail. They don't have their biggest meal, the most calorie-dense meal, which most likely has the most electrolytes in them, until the end of the day, when we've done hiking for the day. So there's a good chance that on a very hot and humid day, while you're hiking and exerting yourself in very tough conditions, that you may run into lower levels of some of these electrolytes due to the vigorous activities that you're doing. So it makes sense for us to try to replace them throughout the day, not just with our meals, but maybe with our hydration. And by choosing to select some sort of electrolyte replacement, we're having greater control over what we take in and when, and it enables us to have some of these elements early in the day while we're still hiking and not wait till the end of the day to replenish them. And this is the reason that many people choose to add some sort of electrolyte replacement to their routine while on the trail, because it allows them to keep those levels higher throughout the day as they hike, and also increases their performance. On a personal note, I started adding electrolyte replacement sometime last year when I was doing my foothills trail hike, which was during the winter. But I noticed that several times, even early in the morning, after doing about 3 or 4 hours of hiking, that I was having certain cramps, usually in my calf muscles. And I began to equate this with having some sort of electrolyte imbalance, because I knew I was well hydrated. I was ingesting a lot of water. I did have a problem with water. As a matter of fact, a lot of times by ingesting a lot of water, you were actually watering down the electrolytes that you have in your body, which all the more requires them to be replaced. So I think it's a pretty smart move. At least in my part, it's worked out well. And I think for a lot of other people, adding some electrolytes to your drink is a good move. It doesn't mean you have to have electrolytes with every drink. I just think that you might want to add them every couple of drinks, or just once in a while, especially with your meals, to add a little extra electrolytes to increase those levels. I don't always have electrolytes in every drink I have. I usually add it to every second or third drink. I don't use it on every drink. Sometimes I do, because it improves the taste of the water. So if the water is really bad, some of these products have a flavor to them, and they can actually improve the water's taste, which increases the chance that you'll keep drinking and stay hydrated. And nowadays, it's easier than ever to add electrolytes to your fluids. You can choose to have a drink that already has electrolytes in it. You can choose to add a powder to your water, which would increase the electrolytes in those. Or there's even drops or pills that you can take that have electrolytes. Additionally, once again, you can always just add some extra food that contains some electrolytes in them, like a salty snack. So enough on electrolytes, and now let's go into heat-related illnesses. They are all tied into, obviously, the electrolytes, the dehydration or hydration levels in your body, and all the symptoms and signs I previously discussed, both this week and last week. Most of the time, you're going to notice there's a lot of correlation in them, and you'll see the same symptoms being repeated over and over. And most of the time when someone gets in trouble with these, without having the illness that I mentioned, like without having like vomiting or diarrhea, which causes an immediate, drain of water from the body and creates a problem, most of these are all going to be heat-related illnesses from doing exercise, especially on very hot and humid days. Or maybe when you're already dehydrated, you decide to exert yourself. So the first thing that I'm going to discuss, heat cramps. And heat cramps are generally cramps in the muscles that are being used to exert or do that exercise. And this is most commonly the result of either water levels in that muscle or electrolyte levels in that muscle being used up or being low for what the body needs. So very, very commonly with a low sodium level, you will receive a cramp in that muscle. So I mentioned already that I started taking electrolytes because about a year and a half ago, while hiking, I started experiencing cramps in my calf muscles. And I knew I was well hydrated. It was still early in the day. I had been taking in fluids and I had eaten, but I probably didn't have enough electrolytes. So since I've taken those products, I have not had a repetition of having cramps in my calves. As a matter of fact, a lot of times I would wake up in the middle of the night with a cramp in my calf muscles, what's commonly called a Charlie horse. So, and it was very, very common for me, and I figured it was based on the exertion because I was using those muscles so much during the day that I was getting a cramp. But since I've actually used the electrolyte replacement, I have not been woken up in the middle of the night with a cramp in my legs because my muscles now have all the electrolytes they need, and I'm staying hydrated better. So with taking in these products and the hydration, the muscle doesn't have a cramp because it's suffering from low electrolytes anymore. It has everything it needs. And I haven't had a repetition of these symptoms, so I have to assume that it's been working. So remember, while you can have the same symptoms for either one, both either, electrolyte levels or water levels, there is a difference. And I attributed mine to the electrolyte levels, not the hydration levels, because I knew I was hydrated. But I would go to take a step, and while taking that step, or even stepping down on a path, I would get a cramp in my calf muscle. But once I started adding salt and the electrolyte replacements, I stopped having those cramps. So it wasn't a hydration problem. And you need to treat both of those things. It's a two-pronged approach, but sometimes it's only one thing that is giving you the problem. It's not hydration, it's more electrolytes. So if you're having problems with cramps while hiking, or even sometimes at night when you're at camp after you've had your meal and you've gone to sleep and you're waking up in the middle of the night with cramps in your calves or in the thigh or something, consider taking some electrolyte therapy replacement. What have you got to lose? If you don't need these substances, you're just going to get rid of them. And none of these products, unless you have a very rare medical condition, are going to affect you by taking extra of them. In most cases, you're taking a very small amount. But if you're worried or you do have a medical condition, consult with your doctor before doing this, just in case you have some concern. The next illness that you'll have if you suffer from dehydration is heat exhaustion. The symptoms that you will see with heat exhaustion is similar to all the other ones. You'll see heavy sweating, cramps, exhaustion, tiredness, fatigue, a headache. You should have some sort of thirst. You might have dizziness. You might have irritable or cranky behavior. Heat exhaustion is the overheating of the body. The body is attempting to cool itself down, however, it's unable to. This is very, very common for someone that's exercising and continues to exercise even though they're dehydrating or suffering the effects of some sort of heat illness. The treatment for this illness should be 1, stop exercising, stop hiking, stop walking. Find a cool place or a shady place to sit down and rest and begin rehydration as soon as possible. That will aid you in recovering from this more rapidly. If you have extra water, you may want to consider even wetting the person down, putting wet rags on them or wetting some of their clothes down to keep them cooler and increase the evaporation. If you're near a water source, you may want to actually have the person get into the water, sit down, or even lay down in more extreme cases to begin cooling down their body faster. And this will enable them to come back and be more alert and feel more energized faster. If you're treating this person for heat exhaustion and they do not improve or begin to respond to your treatment, then you may want to consider an evacuation plan to get that person out and to more advanced medical care, or at least to an air-conditioned car or location that can aid them in cooling their body down. And most of the time, all these steps will be effective in resulting in a turnaround in their situation in about an hour or so. So if you don't see an improvement in about an hour or so of them responding to this treatment, that's when you probably want to begin plan B and maybe think about getting this person out of the trail and into a location where they can either receive advanced medical care, water is more available. Obviously, I would say electrolytes are available, and you probably might want to get some sort of air-conditioned location, which would help them cool down. So once again, a double-pronged approach. In this case, of hydration and cooling should do the trick and get them back to feeling more themselves. If the fluids are not replaced and the body is not allowed to cool down, then heat exhaustion will lead to the most serious heat-related illness, which is heat stroke. And heat stroke is a medical emergency. This is the body's response to its attempts to cool down, and it no longer is able to do that. So in addition to all the symptoms that I've already covered, the most noticeable symptom with heat stroke will be the body will be hot to the touch. Yet there will be no sweating. It will be a dry, very hot feeling to their skin. In addition to that, you may see all the other symptoms you've already observed. You'll see very common will be muscle twitching or spasms. The patient or you will experience headaches, which grow much worse and more severe. Once again, the skin will probably be red, very hot, but dry. The person will most likely experience some sort of confusion. They may get dizzy, nauseous, and pass out or faint on you. They may even see hallucinations or, in some cases, have a seizure as well. Remember, the most common symptom that helps you identify that this is heat stroke is the fact that the body is no longer sweating, but has a high temperature. You will likely see temperatures in the 100s. If in fact their temperature goes over 103, you need to take serious action because there can be permanent damage to both their organs and their brain. Now in children, it's not uncommon to have them have higher temperatures, even in their normal sickness, and they seem to be able to deal with those higher temperatures as a fever more readily than an adult does. If the body is still sweating, you probably have heat exhaustion. Once the body stops sweating, because it can no longer regulate, you now have heat stroke. And all the symptoms for heat stroke will be like heat exhaustion. You want to obviously stop exertion. You want to get them to a cool place or a shady place, an air-conditioned location if possible. You want to begin getting them fluids in them as soon as possible. And you probably want to consider a medical evacuation plan or how to get this person to more advanced medical care as soon as possible. And I would say if you haven't made an evacuation plan, if you treat this person for anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes at the maximum and they are not showing any sign of improvements, you need to get the medical attention or attempt to get medical care to you because this is a medical emergency. And a common thread throughout all these illnesses and all these things we've discussed is becoming hydrated. So if you can stay hydrated, you generally will avoid running into any of these heat-related illnesses. Other medical conditions or factors which make you more susceptible to these are being overweight. And this may also be just not acclimated or overexerting yourself for the activity you're doing. So if you're someone that never goes out hiking and you decide to strap on a 30-pound pack and try and go on a 15-mile hike on a very hot and humid summer day, you may experience some of these symptoms because you're overexerting yourself of what you normally do. So that's why we want to condition our body and get trained to go out and do longer miles and distances with weights on us. So you might start out doing day hikes and then work your way up. Or choose a different day to go out and do your hiking and walking. Once again, certain medicines or drugs may affect your ability. Alcohol will certainly affect the way you can handle the hot weather. Alcohol bonds with water and ties it up and dehydrates you. Additionally, be alert for any medications that warn you about going out in the sun or staying out in the sun, because those make you more susceptible to these illnesses. Obviously, our exertion alone is also making us susceptible. You might want to limit your exercise, maybe cut down your hours that you hike, maybe even skip the hottest hours of the day, learn from the Europeans and take a siesta when needed, and then hike again later on toward the cooler hours of the evening. So maybe hike in the morning, take a nice break, and then hike again in the afternoon. If you already have an illness or a fever from an illness, then you're more susceptible, obviously, to dehydrating and getting a heat-related illness. Additionally, if you dress inappropriately, for instance, you're wearing a jacket in the middle of the summer, another thing you want to be alert for is wearing the wrong type of clothing. So if you're wearing clothing that's very tight or binding or very heavy for the conditions that you're in, these are all things that could possibly lead you to dehydrating or overheating, and you want to be aware of that. One of the other things you want to be aware of is not to use or overload your pack. as you have to carry more and more weight, you have to do more and more energy to work, and that generates heat, which enables your body to have to use more and more water to not only cool it down, but to carry out the processes as you exercise and work. So be aware of your conditioning, but also of your equipment, how heavy it is. Are you bringing the right clothing for the environment? Clothing that will allow you to breathe or your skin to sweat and evaporate to cool off. So just to recap, for all the heat-related illnesses and dehydration or hydration issues, water is best. You may want to consider adding an electrolyte. An electrolyte enables you to recover faster and keeps up your levels of strength and stamina so that you can continue hiking. Avoid using drinks that will not hydrate you, like soda, some of the energy drinks that carry a lot of stimulants in them. You want to avoid coffee and tea. A little bit of caffeine may be good, but too much is not good. In all cases, cooling the body is paramount, as well as hydrating it. Once they begin to cool down and hydrate, they should begin to recover and begin sweating again, which enables their body to continue to cool down. For especially heat stroke, this is not, okay, I took a couple of drinks and I feel better. This might be a day or two until they fully recover. They are not going to be able to continue hiking for a while. You need to consider that and maybe put a plan in action of setting up a campsite and sheltering in place there until they begin to feel better, which might be a day or two. In the meantime, if needed, you can get supplies or go get help, or maybe possibly bring a vehicle or some other way of transporting them closer to where you're at if you can't actually get to where you're at. You may want to position a vehicle or transport closer so that you have a shorter journey, like maybe the next road crossing. So therefore they can walk at a shorter distance and get out of the backcountry. So as usual, the best way to avoid these problems is not to get them in the first place. And that means staying hydrated, keeping our electrolyte levels up. And if you can do that, then you generally avoid any of the related illnesses that are associated with dehydration or heat. All the symptoms and remedies that I discussed last week and this week will serve you well. Treat any hike or activity you're doing on a very, very hot and humid day during the summer as differently than the remainder of the year. Plan on drinking more and keeping hydrated, and perhaps adding an electrolyte replacement therapy. Be honest with yourself, evaluate yourself. How are you doing with keeping hydrated? And do you think that electrolytes are something that you need or should do? It's up to you, you decide. And as I mentioned last week, once again, be aware of your input, how much you're drinking, and your output, how much you're putting out when you go to the bathroom. If you're drinking a lot of water and you're not going to the bathroom, that means you're sweating it or your body is using it. You might need to increase it even more. Pay attention to the color of your urine when you do go to the bathroom. That will be your guide on whether you're hydrated enough or not. And add some electrolytes perhaps, which will increase your ability to perform under adverse conditions. And this is not very, very hard. If you do this a couple of times, it will become second nature to you. Paying attention to your hydration levels and the color of your urine doesn't require any really additional effort. You just have to begin to get used to doing it and take note of it. And once you do, you'll do it all the time. So once again, that's the episode for this week. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video and join me. I appreciate it. If you like what I'm doing, feel free to please leave a comment below. Always love seeing those. Additionally, if you need to and you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to email me. Please consider giving me a thumbs up or a like. And as always, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much once again. Till we meet again. like an arm or a leg to walk or to even grab something. Oh, I don't want to get into that.